All right, the latest college football playoff rankings are out. We have so much to dive into. We'll obviously dive into the rankings, some surprising jump ups, surprising jump downs as well. We'll get into Indiana. Everyone wants to talk Indiana this week. We'll get into that. We'll talk about the SEC versus the Big Ten. Is there really a difference in conferences? And also, a few teams on the outside looking at a few bid stealers. With only a few weeks left in the regular season here, we'll tell you who to keep an eye on that can make some noise late in the regular season. But let's get the first things first here. Rankings released. Let's throw them up here. Here's what the committee did. There's the bracket format that you're looking at right now. And I want to see the big things that stand out. Boise State sitting there at number 4. They jump BYU. And they right now hold that final conference bye, at least going to this weekend. I don't expect that to last when the playoff rankings are made in a few weeks. But BYU, biggest tumble of really any team. They go from 6 down to 14. But remember, right, because how it works is the top 5 conference champions are automatically in. That's why BYU, despite being ranked right now 14th, does have that 12 and final spot in the bracket because they are right now still projected as the highest ranked Big 12 team to be the Big 12 champion right now. So Boise State benefits at the moment. Again, I don't expect this to be the case. I think when it's all said and done, whoever wins the Big 12, BYU, Arizona State, Colorado, Iowa State, whoever it may be, I think you'll see the Big 12 champ hold that 4th and final spot and get a first round bye. I think you'll see Boise State or another group of 5 team, we'll get into here in a little bit, hold that 12th spot when it's all said and done. Okay, outside of the bracket, right? Because other than that, there's really not much of a gigantic change for the most part. Georgia moved up, Tennessee moved down. But that's what I want to get into here. I want to talk about how the committee ranked the 4, 8, and 2 SEC teams because I found that fascinating. Right? Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee. Bunch have overlapped. They've played each other. All sit there at 8 and 2. I disagree with how the committee ranked them. So the committee ranked them Alabama 7, Ole Miss 9, Georgia 10, Tennessee 11. Georgia moved up 2 spots for beating the Vols. Tennessee went from 7 now down to 11. And as you showed you in the bracket beforehand, Tennessee right now first team out of the college football playoff. I think the committee got it wrong. And here's why. I would have ranked them Alabama first, Georgia second, Tennessee third. I would have had Ole Miss on the outside looking in of the college football playoff. If it was my rankings, I would have had Alabama as a 6th team, Georgia 7, Tennessee 10, and then Ole Miss 12, again, first team out. Because I think at this point, right, when you're talking about 10 games, when you're talking about an equal record of 8 and 2, and you're talking about overlap as well, where most of these teams have played each other in one aspect, I don't think you can use just flat out, straight up, head to head. I think it has to be more than that. And that's why I put Alabama first, even though they lost to Tennessee, for example, because I think their resume is the strongest. Win over Georgia, win over South Carolina, win over Mizzou, who somehow is still ranked. That blows my mind, but Mizzou's still hanging on there by a thread at the end of the rankings at 23. Obviously, they lost to Vandy and Tennessee both on the road. But you look at the overall body of work, who they beat, who they lost to. To me, Alabama has the strongest, and Georgia has the second strongest. You know, Ole Miss lost. Bama lost 2 quote-unquote good losses, right? Both on the road. You look at who they beat, Tennessee and Texas. Both at the time they played top 10 opponents, and right now both sit here in the top 11. Those are impressive wins, with, by the way, one on the road against the number 1 team in the country at the time in Texas. Those are impressive wins. That's a great resume. We can't just look at it and say, poo-poo that and no biggie. You know, Georgia still needs to be behind Ole Miss because they lost to them. I get it. But when you look at Ole Miss's overall body of work, I don't think their head-to-head win over Georgia is enough to justify them being over the Dogs right now and even over Tennessee, because Ole Miss holds 2 of the worst losses of any playoff team right now. They lost to 3-win Kentucky at home. Kentucky has 1 conference win. It's at Ole Miss. What are we doing? And that LSU loss looks worse and worse by the week. Look, Tennessee does not have a much better case in terms of their Arkansas loss. But at least their other loss was by 2 touchdowns in a competitive game on the road to Georgia, in which nobody's winning right now in Athens recently. So, like, you look at these resumes with all 4 teams sitting there at 8 and 2. I think right now the team that should be on the outside looking in, right, because 3 of the 4 SEC teams at 8 and 2 are in the playoff. Right now, the one team that's out, according to the committee, is Tennessee. I think that's ridiculous. I can't sit here and punish Tennessee for, again, playing a back-and-forth game against Georgia in Athens, losing a competitive game in which they were in it for 3.5 quarters, and say you're on the outside looking in and reward Ole Miss and ignore blatantly that they have the worst loss of anybody, losing to Kentucky at home, and that LSU loss now again looks worse as they sit there in 6-4. I can't reward right now Ole Miss. I think the Rebels should be right now on the outside looking in. They should be the team that is the first team out, not Tennessee. I think the committee got that wrong. Where the committee got it right, Indiana 5. Again, you're not moving anybody that much. Either, excuse me, easy for me to say. But here's the thing for Indiana, because there's been a lot of consternation, a lot of discussion about Indiana and who they've played and are they overranked and overhyped. Here's the thing with Indiana, first and foremost. If they are competitive against Ohio State, they're in the playoff no matter what. So Hoosier fans, just rest assured, if you have a similar performance to what Tennessee showed at Georgia, you're in the playoff. They're not leaving an 11-1 Indiana team that lost by 10 or 14 on the road in a back-and-forth game to the Buckeyes. They're not doing it. So as long as you're competitive, you're in. Now, if you lose by 20, 24, 28, I think you're screwed. But as long as you're competitive, which Indiana, by the way, showed you all season long so far, there's no reason to believe they won't be competitive in the shoe. You'll be fine, you're in. Win or lose, Indiana's in the playoff as long as the game is close and competitive. And what bothers me about this discourse around Indiana from a lot of national media members and a lot of bashing of Indiana and propping up of the SEC is this. You want to bash Indiana for their strength of schedule? Okay, fine. Two things that you also got to then mention as well. Number one, they are doing what really no other team in the country has done so far this season. And that is they are smacking everybody they play. Look at every top team in the country ranked ahead of them and below them. They've all had close calls. Hell, Oregon week 1 was in a close game against Idaho. Georgia squeaked out a 1-point victory against 3-win Kentucky. We saw Texas last week struggle against Arkansas and win an ugly game on the road. Every team we're talking about in the playoff mix has had at least one, and in most cases, multiple close calls in which they played down against inferior opponents and were lucky to win. In the case of Ole Miss, lost flat out. Indiana, outside of Michigan, they have literally beat the brakes off of everybody they played. They played nobody, but they have made inferior opponents look inferior. They have left no doubt, which is not something you can say about a lot of teams this year. That's first and foremost. The other thing that's really bothering and really frustrating is the double standard people have when talking about Indiana. Everybody wants to bash the Hoosiers, in part because, well, they're not a big brand. They're a basketball school. They've been, pretty crappy as a football team for basically the entire existence of the program. Where was this same energy for India being overhyped and overranked last year for Georgia? Because you want to talk about playing nobody. Who did Georgia play last year? Right, remember last year in 2023, all we were talking about was Georgia's easy schedule, the cakewalk they had to the SEC title game. Yet, despite playing nobody, despite the easiest SEC schedule you could ever have imagined, they sat in the College Football Playoff rankings every single week until they lost to Alabama at either 1 or 2. Nobody said boo then that they were overhyped or overranked. And by the way, the only team they did play last year that pushed them and was tough, Alabama, they got dominated by. So why is no one talking about Georgia last year being overhyped and overrated? Oh, because they've had previous success? But again, that previous success has nothing to do with this current year. Georgia winning the national title in 2022 has no bearing on how the 2023 team plays. Just like Indiana being dog water for 126 years of their existence has no impact on how they play this year. Indiana is smacking teams. And what's happening is brand bias. They look at the side of the helmet, they see the IU and say, oh, that team, they've sucked for years. There's no way they're good. Oh, Georgia's been good for years, so yeah, we think they're pretty good. Every year is different. And so if you're going to criticize Indiana this year, then you for sure better be the same person, keep that same energy, and better have been saying the same thing about Georgia last year. There's no difference. Both have played bad schedules. One didn't get criticized for it last year. One is getting criticized for it this year. It's ridiculous. The helmet scouting, the brand bias is disgusting. How about this? Put on the game and watch Indiana. Watch them play. You'll be impressed. I promise you that. And one other thing with Indiana. I don't know what we're doing on ESPN. I don't know. But Joey Galloway on Wednesday night decided was the perfect time to share this. ESPN has trusted him, right? To be one of the voices of reason, the voices of truth, to give expert analysis on these rankings as they come out. And Joey Galloway used that opportunity to say this.
If we believe in what our metrics are saying, if I'm Indiana, I don't know if I'm playing Rourke against Ohio State. We've seen what happened to Florida State last year, Jordan Travis. What could keep Indiana out of this? Getting their quarterback hurt. We've seen it happen to Florida State last year, having not played anybody.
Or losing by 30.
What is he talking about? What are we doing? Sit Curtis Rourke for what? So he doesn't get hurt, so you can guarantee yourself to be a playoff team? You heard Booger say in the background, if Indiana with their backup quarterback loses by 30, they're not in the playoff. And you know what? I can't argue that. That's a loser mentality, number one. Why you're spewing that nonsense is ridiculous. But also, how about this? How about we look at it from a positive perspective? How about, if you want to actually believe Indiana's good, how about them going to the shoe and winning? How about Indiana right now having an opportunity, number one, to shut everybody in the country up about how they've played nobody and they're not as good as the record says they are? And then how about this? How about you set yourself up, if you beat Ohio State, to go to the Big Ten title game, to beat Oregon, and get a first-round bye, to let everybody know you are a legit contender. And worst case, by the way, if you go to the Big Ten title game and you lose to Oregon, your consolation prize is a home game in the first round of the playoff. You'll be 5, 6, 7 in that range. You're going to get a home playoff game. So there was literally no reason to think of sitting your quarterback. By the way, Joey, the circumstances surrounding Florida State and Indiana this year could not be any different. Primarily because we have a 12-team playoff this year. It's not 4, 12. That comp, I bet you too, you probably thought of the comp like before the show, goes, oh guys, I got this great comp. You're going to love it. You're going to love what I'm about to say. This is so genius. No one's thought about this. I'm the smartest guy in the room. Nobody. Nobody's thought about it because that is a stupid idea. That's a loser mentality. And maybe Joey's scared. Ohio State alum. Maybe he's afraid of Indiana. Anyway, thankfully, that's not what Indiana is going to do on Saturday. Thank God Joey Galloway's not giving them advice. A few other things here I want to just quickly bring up before we do wrap this up. And that is the SEC bias that has been peddled the last few weeks is ridiculous. It is honestly, frankly disgusting. What you're hearing about national media members, how lopsided the SEC is compared to the Big Ten. Let's actually take a look. Like, if you actually want to break this down, let's do it here. The Big Ten and the SEC, you know what they are? They're identical. There is no difference between the SEC and the Big Ten this year. The only difference actually is there's one. The SEC has better PR. That's it. They have better spokesmen. They get the message out better. Other than that, name me a real difference. Where is the SEC head and shoulders better than the Big Ten? They're not, and let's just break it down really fast here. If you merge these two conferences, right, into power rankings, who are the first two teams ranked between the Big Ten and the SEC? Easily, it's Oregon 1, Big Ten, Ohio State 2. The two Big Ten teams are by far head and shoulders better than any SEC team right now this year. So the Big Ten has the teams at the elite top better than the SEC. You want to say Georgia and Alabama are in the next tier? Okay, fine. And then below them, well, you want to look at the combination of Penn State, Indiana, Ole Miss, Tennessee, A&M. You want to throw them in there as well? Name me a difference. Find me the difference between any of those 5 teams. The answer is you can't. They're all the same. They all have the same ability and opportunity to win a national title. Not one team is head and shoulders better than the other. I think if you had a round robin between those 5 teams, you would find that their records would be pretty similar. So you want to, push how great the SEC is and all big bad SEC, these teams are so great. You're looking right now, the Big Ten is the 2 best teams in the country, in their conference. And a bunch of the teams that are pretty good and that, top 10 playoff championship contender tier, they're all the same. And then you want to look at like the bottom of the rankings, right? Like the middle average tier. What's the difference between Illinois, Missouri, and South Carolina? I can't find one. They're all the same. Those three programs are the same historically and also what they've done this year. So you want to push this SEC is great narrative. How? Where? Where are they head and shoulders better than the Big Ten? They're not. The bottom of the SEC sucks like the bottom of the Big Ten sucks. The only difference you could talk about here is the schedule disparity, which, by the way, is true in both conferences. Sure, Georgia got the short end of the stick this year. Well, last year they breezed through the SEC, no problem. You know, you want to look at Indiana. Yeah, they're playing nobody this year. They got a great draw. Well, guess what? So did Texas. Who has Texas played so far this year? Nobody. And the only game they actually got pushed and tested in, they got blown out at home. So, you know, you want to make this argument and talk about SEC supremacy. It's not the case this year. The teams just bear down how you watch them. And it's equal where some teams have a tougher schedule than others. Ohio State this year having to go on the road at Oregon and at Penn State. Other teams have not played anybody. Indiana, Texas. It's the same. It is the same. So that's why the SEC is the Big Ten with better PR. There's no difference. And just hearing the SEC propaganda is sickening. Sickening. Find me a difference between the two. You can't. After you watch a football this year, and we're talking about only 2024, you can't spot the difference between the Big Ten and the SEC. It is all garbage and nonsense. Finally, let's talk about a few teams on the outside here. Actually, one more thing about the Big Ten SEC. Both teams are getting 4 teams in. Rightfully so. But that's, who is complaining about that? The SEC rightfully should get 4 teams in. Same with the Big Ten. No one conference is getting squeezed more than the other. Anyway, last thing I want to say here. 3 teams to keep an eye on for that are right now out of the playoff rankings, not named SMU, that I think could really be a big stealer here and shock some people as we are really heading towards the home stretch here. Number 1, Texas A&M. A&M is a great opportunity here where they're on the road at Auburn this week. Crappy team. Should win that. And then if you are able to beat Texas at home, I think regardless of what happens in the SEC title game, you're in. Like Lane Kiffin was talking about this week that SEC coaches don't want to play in the SEC title game because they're afraid they're going to get punished for playing an extra game. If they lose and 3 losses, they'll be out of the playoff when other 2-loss teams that missed the conference championship game could be in. I don't buy that. I don't think the committee will punish A&M if they win their next 2 games. They go into the SEC title game at 10-2, lose to Georgia, lose to Alabama, lose in a rematch of Texas maybe even. I don't think A&M at 10-3 is out. I think they're in. Now, they may have the 12 seed, 11 seed. It's not going to be an easy road, but I think they're in the playoff. I don't think the committee is going to drastically punish teams that play in a conference championship game. Now, for teams or conferences like the Big 12 and the ACC, for SMU, Miami, is the loser out? Yeah. If we're talking about BYU, Colorado, is the loser out? I think so as well. But for the SEC and the Big Ten, I think if you make it to conference championship weekend, I think you're in. You can feel safe about that. I think if you're, a school like Ole Miss, for example, I think you could be left out with 2 losses and you could have an A&M team jump you. That's where I think if you're Lane Kiffin, that's where you should be worried. Not focus on missing the SEC title game to kind of bolster your case because it's one less game, so one less opportunity to lose. That I don't buy from Lane Kiffin, and I don't think the committee will have drastic measures based on who makes the conference championship game. The other team to look out for, Army. Currently right now, 19th in the country, creeping up. Huge game this week against number 6 Notre Dame. They beat the Irish, which, by the way, give you a pick. Check out Hick's 5-minute picks on Thursday, YouTube right here. Also, if you're listening on our podcast feed there as well, Hick at Night, Night spelled Nite, give you all the picks of the biggest games here of the weekend. If Army's able to beat Notre Dame, they already have clinched a spot in the AAC title game. They will face number 20 Tulane. If we're talking about Army beating Notre Dame, top 6, beating another top 20 opponent in Tulane, how are they out? They're not. They're jumping Boise State. Boise State right now, the only ranked one they have on their schedule is UNLV, who just cracked the rankings here at 24. Army's resume is going to be better than the Broncos. So even though Boise State has always had that position on lock, right now, look at the gap. Boise State is 12, Army's 19, 7 spots. You're telling me Army's not going to climb 7 spots? They beat a top 6 team and a top 20 team in back-to-back weeks? They will. So Boise State right now, I don't think you control your destiny. I think right now you have to root for Army to lose. That's how you make a college football playoff berth, is by not having Army in. Keep an eye on the Black Knights. Should be a fun game against Irish this week. They win the next 2 games and obviously beat Navy at the end of the year. There, which by the way, we could be talking about, do they delay the playoff rankings? If Army's 12-0 and they have the Navy game at the a week after Conference Championship weekend, I don't know what they do. Is it contingent if Army wins, they're in? If they lose, Boise State's in? I have no idea what they're going to do. It's going to be fascinating to see, but that's a real scenario that could happen here. Also a real scenario, last thing to keep an eye on. Arizona State. They won't take an at-large bid, but you look at how they're playing some great football. They just took down Kansas State on the road last week, and now they welcome number 14 BYU. If ASU is able to win this game, they essentially is like one tiebreaker that really maybe could go their way. It's still see about, it's like conference strength record. So that is obviously subject to change based on the last 2 weeks. But essentially, they control their destiny. So if you beat BYU, you beat Arizona, you're 60 minutes away from winning the Big 12 and maybe even getting a bye. Arizona State's a team to keep an eye on. They're playing great football. Cam Scadaboo's a tremendous running back. And this is going to be a buzzsaw of a game here for BYU. They're in big-time trouble. And Arizona State, they're playing some of the best football of anyone in the Big 12. They are absolutely capable of winning that conference, which means if you do, you are in. Those 3 teams to keep an eye on for here as we wind down the last 2 weeks of the college football regular season. Still a lot of chaos here still to go. So make sure you're subscribing to the channel, Ryan Hickey on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe on the podcast feed as well. Hick at Night, Night spelled N-I-T. That's where the audio version of this will be found. We got so much still to break down and discuss. Again, keep an eye out here for Hick's 5-minute picks dropping on Thursday to preview a big weekend in college football. And hey, enjoy it.